Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Survivor 48 following the premiere, and I thought this was a pretty good premiere, definitely a better one compared to 47, where I feel like we definitely got to know this cast a lot more than the premiere from 47. And obviously, with this now being the start of the season, I expect my thoughts to change, and they probably have, but we'll get to that soon enough. But we have 18 people to talk about, and as always, some more time, let's go into the video. So starting off at number 18, we have the first boot of the season, and here we have Stephanie. And I wasn't that shocked by the end of it that Stephanie was going home, where I feel like there was definitely a lot of setup to Stephanie being the first boot, with her talking early on about how her plan was to sit on her hands. She compared herself to Say, talking about how time will tell whose strategy will pay off, and obviously we see Say's strategy paying off with Say playing hard early on, building the majority alliance, getting the idol right at the bat. And I feel like that's a gameplay style that Survivor Production themselves would favor, and through that you could definitely tell that Say would win the battle here, and that ended up being the case by the end of it. Stephanie became this consensus target, so much so that even Stephanie herself knew she was on the bottom, and she played her shot in the dark, only for that to not work out. So I'm not too shocked that Stephanie was the boot by the end of it. And obviously Stephanie was just kind of fine as a first boot here, where it's actually kind of funny how in my preseason assessment of her that my fear was that she was gonna struggle a lot with holding back and not being too domineering. And I was kind of right by the end of it. Mind you, I didn't expect it to play out this way, where Stephanie would hold back so much to where she would not play the game as hard as she probably should have. And obviously it is a shame to lose Stephanie in this way, though at the same time, if we are comparing her to other first boots, again, she was just kind of fine, to where she was clearly in the bottom from the start, didn't really have much of a shot staying at the point where they lost the first challenge, and she was his consensus target. Now, she did have Mary by her side, but really, she didn't really have many other options beyond that point, and she's now out of the game to where she's here at number 18. And with that, we have 17 people left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win the game based on their edit and current game position. But number 17, we actually have the person who I had pretty low in my preseason power ranking, and unfortunately, it is kind of playing out how I expected. But number 17, we do have Star. And Star is someone who is clearly in the bottom of the Locky tribe right now, where she is like this consensus target. People call her out for looking for idols early on. And at the same time, she isn't really getting that much focus in the edit, to where her only content really comes when they're around camp, talking about how Eve is a beast. And then her other scene is her looking for the idol. Or beyond that, we don't really see her establishing any relationships. We don't really any personal content from her. And she is kind of a bit under the radar, which I wasn't expecting that much, where she really popped off in her preseason interview. She seemed like she would be this pretty big character. So for her to be pretty subdued in the edit is probably a bad sign for her moving forward. Now again, considering that her tribe seems to be pretty stacked physically, it wouldn't shock me if she gets further into the game simply due to her tribe winning challenges. But if they do lose a challenge along the way and go to tribal, I would expect her to be in a lot of trouble. And even if she does squeak through, I feel like just with just how subdued her edit has been, with how little setup there's been for her to have success on the season, I'm just not feeling that great about her, which is why she's here at number 17. Now moving on to number 16, and we have someone who's in a pretty similar spot to Star right now, but has one slight advantage. By number 16, we do have Charity. And I think Charity is also in a similar boat to Star, where she has been set up as this early target for her tribe, the Siva tribe here, where we see Camilla throwing her under the bus after she suggested that Kyle could have this advantage. And obviously that's not great, where the fact that that's the bulk of her content across the premiere makes me think that if Siva goes to travel relatively soon, that Charity will be in a lot of danger, which is not particularly great there. Though the one thing that I have Charity above Star for is that she does at least get a confessional during the intro, where she does get to talk about being a flight attendant and how she's played Survivor and a Medal 2 for 9 years. So I feel like that's a slight edge that Charity has over Star. But beyond that, I feel like the rest of her premiere is pretty lackluster. And I feel like at this point, she's just not a priority within the story, to where she's here at number 16. Now moving on to number 15, and we have another person who has been mostly under the radar so far, and considering that, I'm not feeling that great about them. But number 15, we do have Justin. And I'm a bit disappointed that Justin has been as quiet as he's been, to where the bulk of his content comes during the scramble, where he talks about being in the middle and how he has these bonds to obviously Say's alliance, but also with the likes of Mary and Stephanie. But beyond that, I feel like Justin himself is not that big of a focus there. Now, admittedly, he does get to talk a little bit about his pizza business, talking about how playing the middles, like working in a restaurant, how you have to keep inventory and stuff. So, I mean, that's at least something. But beyond that, I was very underwhelmed by Justin's content. I feel like it was very surface level for a lot of it. And even with his decision to stick with the Alliance, I feel like that wasn't really much of a chance to prop him up when it probably should have. So I'm not feeling that great about Justin at this point. And while he could shoot up in the future, I'm not feeling that great about him right now, which is why he's here at number 15. Now moving on to number 14, and we are once again sticking with the Vula tribe. By number 14, we do have Cedric. And Cedric was also just kind of there for the most part. Didn't really get a great premiere at the end of the day, and not really someone I'm looking at as a contender. The reason he's above Justin is sort of similar to Charity and Starch. Cedric does get a confessional in the intro talking about how it's time to play and that his son told him to ball out, whatever that means. And again, he does get a little more content than Justin, but at the end of the day, not really something looking at as a contender. Doesn't really get much personal content, doesn't get any one-on-one relationships, and that's a big reason why I do have Cedric here at number 14. Now moving on to number 13, we have another person who was kind of just there, didn't get that much to do. But number 13, we do have Chrissy. And again, Chrissy was just kind of there, didn't get that much to do. We don't really see her building any one-on-one bonds, even though she does seem to be part of the majority. However, she does get a couple things at the beginning where she does get a Matt chat to start talking about how she's been watching since the beginning and she saw Jeff's message telling her to reply with that something at least. She does also get a little bit of personal content talking about how she's a lieutenant in the fire department and that her job will help her in the game and that she won't boss people around, which she does effectively do, even though it doesn't lead to her getting that much to do. So again, Chrissy's someone who I don't think has that great of a shot at winning, but it's those little things that put her above the other people, which is why she's here at number 13. Now moving on to number 12, and we are going back now to the Vula tribe, and actually the person who was at the very bottom of my preseason power ranking. By number 12, we do have Mary. And obviously this was not a great premiere for Mary from a gameplay perspective, where she is blindsided at the first vote, she's on the bottom of her tribe, and obviously that's not particularly great. However, I do think her premiere outside of that was a bit more noteworthy, where she does get to start the fire for her tribe, gets to talk about how no one cares about making fire, which I found slightly amusing. And she does also get to set up her relationship with Kevin, which is somewhat noteworthy, as Jeff mentioned in a preseason interview that the main theme of the season is going to be partnerships. And we see that play out where we do see several duos develop over the course of this premiere. And through that impacts my analysis, where I feel like the people that are included in these duos are naturally going to be above people who are not included in duos, as considering that that's the main theme of the season, I feel like someone who is in a partnership is going to end up doing pretty well across the season. And that obviously is what elevates Mary a bit. Though at the same time, I do question whether the Kevin-Mary relationship is really going to pan out, considering Kevin leaves her out of the vote, which is obviously not a great sign there. And beyond that, I still think Mary has an uphill battle in terms of actually winning the game, considering she's at the bottom right now, and considering that the Kevin-Mary duo is immediately negated by how the vote plays out. I'm not feeling that great about Mary either, which is why she's here number 12. Now moving on to number 11, we have another person who was very low in my preseason power ranking. And to be fair, I still don't think this person's winning, but at least this person had a big premiere. By number 11, we do have David. And truth be told, I don't expect David to go on to win the season. I feel like he's someone who's largely there as his big character, someone who's going to be a bit of a goofball, a bit of a dodo, and obviously that's not particularly great for his chances. Though at the same time, he does get a lot of visibility across his premiere, where during the intro montage of showing everyone getting their casting calls, he does get a decent amount of focus there with several shots coming back to him. That's obviously something. He gets a confessional in the intro talking about how he wants to be the hero, and then he wants to wave a giant sign saying you need to worry about him, which admittedly is not a great way to approach the game, but whatever. And again, he is all over this premiere, and obviously that is somewhat noteworthy here, but at the end of the day, I'm still not expecting David to be that big of a player across the season, where even this premiere, he does not get a set-up one-on-one relationship. That's not great. You have people talking about him as a potential threat down the road. And again, he is a bit of a goober, so I feel like he's not going to do well inherently because of that. So again, not looking at David as a serious contender, but the fact that he at least got a big premiere is what leads him a bit higher here at number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and very similar to David, I don't expect this person to go on to win, but they at least had a big premiere. By number 10, we do have Say. And Say is kind of panning out how I expected her to, where she is this pretty big presence around camp. She is probably playing the hardest out of anyone on her tribe, where she is the main instigator of the initial majority alliance on her group, and she does get her way there. And along with that, she gets tons of content with her looking for the Beware advantage, solving the puzzle, and obviously she is a target during the round that also causes her to get decent amount of focus there, and she does win the day. She does get her way with the actual vote. However, I don't expect it to last, if I'm being honest, as I feel like even with her having this big premiere, a lot of it felt circumstantial, where obviously she was going to get a lot of screen time simply due to the fact that she is a big presence across the premiere, but I don't really expect it to last, where I would expect the game to flip on her at some point. It's just a matter of when. But again, Say is someone who is obviously this high due to the fact that she is a big character early on, but with the way that she's playing the game, with the way that she's being presented, I wouldn't be shocked if the game flips on her later on in the game. And especially if her tribe continues to go to tribal, it wouldn't shock me if the game eventually flips against her. So obviously that's not particularly great, and a big reason why I do have her this low at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and we have someone who I do think has a bit more longevity within him, but still not someone I'm expecting to win this season. But number 9, we do have Mitch. And Mitch was a bit of an interesting person to assess here, as he does get some noteworthy things, like the fact that he is the first to be shown getting his casting call at the very start of the episode. That's noteworthy. He also gets a mad chat talking about how he has a speech impediment and how he's been watching since the beginning, and even gets to reference Christy Smith from the Amazon. Again, that's all pretty good. However, I feel like after the beginning of the episode, he kind of dies off to where I feel like a lot of his content afterwards is pretty surface level, which I do find a bit underwhelming. We don't really see him building any close bonds here, where I guess you could say he's working with David, but we don't really get much focus on that. And again, I feel like beyond like the beginning of the episode, I found Mitch's edit here to be pretty underwhelming, pretty by the numbers, and not someone who I'm expecting to go on to win the season. And obviously that's a big reason why he is not higher on this list. But at the same time, I feel like he doesn't have as many red flags as the likes of David or Say. That makes me think he could be around for a bit. But at the end of the day, not looking at him as a potential winner, which is why he's here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and we have another person who I was pretty underwhelmed by their edit across this episode, even though they got a decent amount of screen time. But number 8, we do have Kyle. And I was pretty underwhelmed by Kyle's edit here, where a lot of his content felt very surface level, where obviously he was involved with the challenge after the initial challenge, him getting DQ'd after breaking the pot there. And again, obviously that's not great, the fact that so much of his screen time is dedicated to that. His opening confessional is him talking about the fact that he lost a challenge, and that's the worst feeling ever, and that he feels like he is accountable for this loss. So again, not feeling great about him in that regard. Now, the reason he is a bit higher here is he does at least get a setup duo with Camilla, though even then I feel like Camilla gets more of the focus for the duo there, where obviously Camilla ends up like finding out from Charity that Charity's targeting him, only to later throw Charity under the bus, where we don't really get Kyle's reaction to that, which is not particularly great there. But even so, he does also talk about how he is a lawyer, but plans to tell people he's a teacher. So again, we do get to learn bits and pieces about Kyle, but for the most part, I would say his content is pretty circumstantial, and I do think Camilla kind of overshadows him by the end of it, which is why I'm feeling not that great about him at this point, even though I was high on him in the preseason. But for now, I do have him here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and we have another person who I was a bit underwhelmed by in terms of their edit. However, I think this person has more potential to move up in the future compared to Kyle. But number 7, we do have Bianca. And Bianca didn't get that much to do here. However, I do think the content she does get was a bit noteworthy, where she does get a good opening confessional talking about how she wants to play a social game, and that leads into her setup relationship with Thomas. Again, another duo there. Now, I do think the Thomas-Bianca duo is a bit overshadowed within the episode, to where we later see Thomas trying to include Bianca in the alliance, only for that to kind of get mixed results there. But still, I think Bianca at least gets a setup to her future relationship, which I think is a pro for her over a lot of other people here. However, beyond her opening confessional, she really doesn't get that much to do across the episode, where, again, I feel like Thomas gets more of the screen time for the duo. And on top of that, you have one of the secret scenes being about her, where she gets to talk more about her social game and that. So the fact that that was cut from the episode is probably a bad sign for Bianca moving forward, as if she were the winner, you would think they would want to include that to highlight her social game. So again, I feel like I'm kind of getting mixed signals from Bianca, but it's the fact that she does have this setup to a relationship with Thomas. The fact that she does talk about wanting to play a social game was enough to have her relatively high here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and we have another person who got set up to be part of a duo. But number 6, we do have Camilla. And admittedly, I initially had Camilla a little bit lower here, as truth be told, I kind of got mixed signals from her premiere, where on one hand, I think there's plenty of good stuff. Like the fact that she does get to set up her relationship with Kyle right at the bat is pretty good. The fact that she gets the bulk of the screen time for the duo is pretty good, where we see her like wanting to defend Kyle after Charity suggests that Kyle could have this advantage. So obviously that's something in here. Though at the same time, she also talks a lot about how she wants to cause chaos and have fun while doing it. And you could see her throwing Charity under the bus right at the bat as a sign of that. And I think through that, I think it could go one of two ways for Camilla, where on one hand, I could see her and Kyle being like this duo that's able to run their Siva tribe during a lot of the early game. but I could also see a world where she gets a bit too caught up in her own like hectic gameplay, and I could see Camilla playing a messy game that causes her to be a target due to her sloppy play. So I do feel like it could go either way for Camilla at this point. I'm not entirely sure what to make of her. And while there are plenty of people who have Camilla very, very high on their Edgic boards, I feel like the fact that there is this potential downside for her where she does talk about wanting to cause chaos, and I could see a world where that could lead to her downfall, is what's giving me a bit more hesitation with having her pretty high. But it's the fact that she does have a setup duo with Kyle that makes her at least somewhat of a contender to where she's here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and as a spoiler for the rest of the list, this is actually the highest ranked person not on Logi, but number 5 we do have Kevin. And obviously Kevin is the main star of the Vula tribe, where he gets so much screen time across the premiere, where right off the bat he gets a Matt chat talking about how he's been watching the show since a young age, how he got inspired by Yule, and how this season feels like David versus Goliath. You obviously have him getting injured during the initial challenge, only for them to skip over the medical visit, which makes me think that's not going to be that big of a deal moving forward. He ends up winning the challenge after the challenge to earn supplies for his tribe. You have him getting strategic content where he is shown being a pretty central force there, being included in the majority alliance while having Mary in her back pocket. So again, there's obviously a lot there to break down. The other thing along with that comes some red flags here where, again, the fact that he does set up this relationship with Mary only to immediately leave Mary out of the initial vote is probably a bad sign for how that duo is going to do moving forward. And on top of that, he just screams out like as the big player of the season, where he is going to be like this person who ends up driving a lot of the action, someone who gets a ton of screen time and makes you think that he is going to be like the player of the season, only to eventually be taken out as his big threat later on in the game. I mean, we've seen this before on Survivor, and I feel like Kevin is just falling right into that trap. So I feel like for that reason, I can't really have him as a contender because of that. But again, the fact that he is at least being set up to be a main character in the season is why he is higher than a lot of the other people we already talked about. But again, not looking at someone to actually go on to win the season, which is why he's here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and as I alluded to, these top 4 are all in the same tribe, that being the Logi tribe. As again, I feel like the Logi tribe has by far the most complexity after the premiere, where we have so many people getting like decent edits at this point, and it's really just a matter of ordering them. But at number 4, I did decide to go with Shaheen. And I felt this was a fine premiere for Shaheen, where I feel like there's definitely some good things to point out here, where you have his opening confessional about how he plans to eat everyone's lunch, which is a noteworthy quote there. You have him getting to set up his position on the Logi tribe, how he's included in the California Girls Alliance. So again, I feel like Shaheen is clearly being set up here as someone to look out for. Though at the same time, I think the biggest knock against him is the fact that he's not part of a duo. Again, he's part of the alliance, the majority alliance, but he's not being set up as having a one-on-one with the other members there, where again, Joe and Thomas have their setup one-on-ones, whereas Shaheen is just kind of in the alliance. So I feel like that's kind of a knock to him, the fact that he's not really going along with the theme of the season, as Jeff puts it. So again, I'm not feeling that great about Shaheen because of that, but I feel like the rest of his premieres was still pretty good. I still expect him to be a contender in the future, but it's that little thing that leaves him behind here on number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and we have another person who got a pretty strong premiere, all things considered. But number 3, we do have Eva. And again, I feel like Eva got a pretty solid premiere, really checked off a lot of boxes that makes me feel pretty confident in her. Right out of the bat, she gets a confessional during the intro, talking about how she is used to being in male-dominated fields, and that doesn't scare her at all, and that she's going to battle her ass off, and that she'll beat them. That's all pretty good. She also gets to set up her relationship with Joe. That's also pretty good. Again, being part of these duos and partnerships that is going to be the theme of the season. I think that really helps propel Eva moving forward. But obviously, she also gets a ton of personal content where she talks about being the youngest on the tribe, and we see her like gathering the bamboo as that allows her to fixate on something to do. And then she decides to come out to Joe as being autistic and really describing what that means and how she'll need support in the game. And admittedly, from a personal perspective, I was a bit uncomfortable by how emotional the scene ended up being and how they really try to tug at your heartstrings here. I feel like something like this should be a bit more normalized, but again, that's just me. But taking that away, I do think that this is still a very strong scene and one that really sets up Eva and Joe to have a lot of longevity in the game. Or the fact that Eva lists out situations where she'll need support and telling Joe how he can support her makes me think that that stuff will come up in the future. And through that, again, I think it really sets up Eva to do well moving forward. Where this felt different from Jess from 46, who had ADHD and really struggled on the island. She ended up being an early boot, and the show just barely hinted at her ADHD. So the fact that the show is dedicating so much attention to Eva's neurodivergence like makes me think that it is going to lead to Eva being like a major contender of the season, mixing in like all the other things, like the fact that she has a set up relationship, the fact that she gets decent content outside of that makes me think that Eva is being set up to do well moving forward. Though the reason I don't have her at number one is she did still get a ton of screen time to where it could come off as a bit overexposed. And with the top two people still having set up partnerships in the future, I feel like it was enough to leave Eva behind here. Though at the same time, I do expect her to do pretty well to where she's here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and I actually had this person a few spots lower when I first put this list together, though after reassessing it, I did decide that it was worth having them this high. But number 2, we do have Joe. And again, Joe is pretty clearly set up to be a big character in the season where he gets plenty of screen time across the entire episode, where first up, he is the last person to be shown getting their casting call, where he gets a pretty extended reaction there. He also gets the first confessional of the season, talking about how he's a fire captain and how there's the adrenaline of running into the fire and that he needs to use that adrenaline to his advantage. Obviously, that's pretty good. He obviously gets to set up relationship to Eva, and that's a pretty big scene there. He talks about how he's got Eva and that he's not going to let her down. So again, I feel like there's a lot of good stuff here with Joe. Again, has a set up partnership, gets plenty of setup early on the episode to let us know who he is. Though the reason why I hesitated with having him higher is one, the fact that he does seem to be a pretty big character. I don't love that aspect to it. Also, in his confessional where he talks about Eva, he says that he's willing to hurt his own game to keep Eva safe and that he's willing to go home early. And while I don't think he's actually going to hurt his game that much, the fact that he said that is probably not the greatest sign, if I'm being honest. But still, I'm looking at Joe as a strong contender in the season. Again, the fact that he's on the complex tribe, the fact that he has this partnership, the fact that he gets plenty of setup to him being this rootable figure in the season are all pretty good signs for me, and for that reason, he is here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Survivor 48 right now is my winner pick, and here we have Thomas. And Thomas was not my initial pick to be number 1 on this power ranking, where even though I felt pretty good about him coming to the season, he was my winner pick. I was a bit more tempted to put other people at number 1 over him, but again, I still feel like he got a pretty decent episode, all things considered, where he does get a good introduction talking about how first impressions are important and that he needs to fit himself accordingly. And along with that, gets to talk about each of his tribe mates one by one, giving his initial thoughts about them. He ends up getting the setup relationship to Bianca. Again, that's set up as a partnership there, and is later pulled into the Majority Alliance, the California Girls. However, at the same time, he is unsuccessful in pulling in Bianca into that alliance, where it seems like the consensus in that group is to pull in Eva, which obviously benefits Joe more so. So again, that was a bit of a hesitation with having him at number 1. But I still feel like this was a solid premiere for Thomas here, where he gets good enough content getting to set up his initial game, gets to set up his partnership, but not in a way that feels overexposed, to where he's not the biggest character. I feel like the likes of Eva and Joe overshadow him there, while still getting the setup to do well moving forward. And again, I feel like the Logi tribe in general is the tribe that I feel the most confident in to produce the winner at this current point. Now, I will say that a major hesitation in general is the fact that in the last few seasons, the person I have at number 1 after the premiere generally does not go on to win the season. Where in 47, I had Sam at number 1 after the premiere. In 46, I had Maria at number 1 after the premiere. In 45, I had Katura at number 1 after the premiere. None of them went on to win the game. So I do feel like that is at least one thing to keep in mind as we go through the season here, where, again, I'm not expecting Thomas to be the frontrunner the entire time, nor do I think it's a for sure thing that he'll go on to win the season. However, I feel like based on what we're seeing right now, I feel like I'm the most confident in Thomas at this current point. I feel like there's the most evidence pointing towards Thomas doing well, and that's a big reason why I currently have him here at number 1. And there we go, that'll do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, really helps with the channel. Now I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so you can look forward to that. I'm still covering The Traders US Season 3, along with Australian Survivor, Brains vs. Brawn 2, and we're going to be getting a new season of The Amazing Race, so there'll be a lot of stuff coming away there. I am on Patreon and have a YouTube membership, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description, and you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.